Welcome to The Alignment Show, featuring conversations with folks who have taken steps to identify their highest values and align their lives around them. Time on this earth is not unlimited, and you may be seeking to make sure you spend your time on things that matter to you. These conversations will encourage you and support you in doing so. Now, let's meet this week's guest on The Alignment Show. And good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome once again to The Alignment Show. My name is Don King. I am your host, and we have an exciting conversation for you today. Before we get into that, want to remind you that we have some things going on here at the home base. We are on the verge of releasing the next book in the Sparklight Chronicles. A lot of you who have been following us know that we have had The Way of the 3-Year-Old Why out there for a while. And if you're interested in that, here is that book. But then we have its sequel coming out, and Medium Well is the name of that one. It is a business parable like the first one. I've got a QR code up on the screen for that. And then for those of you who are listening audio only, you can actually get the first scene of the new book, which features a lot of the same lovable characters. You can get that by going to donking.com. That's DONNKING.com/medium well first. And you'll be able to see that first scene. So I hope that would be of interest to you. We would be glad to make a difference to you in your life with both The Way of the 3-Year-Old Why and Medium Well. With that, I am pleased to be able to introduce our guests this week. Both of them have been on here before, and I'm adding in a recording here even as we speak. Got to get things lined up right. Okay, yeah, we should be in good shape there. We did record this one ahead of time because of needing to coordinate schedules, although I think maybe one of them may be with us in chat. We will see. We have Jeff West and Bob Burg on with us. Now, as we said, both of them have been on before. We will link in the show notes to those previous episodes so you can get to know their backgrounds, their origin stories. But this week, I am glad to have them on to talk about their new book together. Now, I will mention that we had a glitch in the recording. The Jeff West had some problems with sound, and then when he came back, it wasn't synced up. Jeff doesn't know this, but the sound and the video were not together, so I had to go in and fix that. Took hours to get it lined up. On the other hand, I'm glad we were recording instead of live, because if we had run into that live, it could have really thrown things off. And it reminded me that we have amazing tools to be able to do that kind of editing these days. And I hope I'm illustrating something here about the two of them. They are masters of mindset. As an old dead Greek guy once said, it's not what happens to you, but what you think about what happens to you that determines your experience. And that mindset thing is demonstrated in their new book, Saleswise to Street. No, did I get that right? Saleswise to Streetwise. I think I got it right, but we're certainly going to see it in the recording. Now, audio only, folks, you may not even be able to tell where the glitch was. We do have a little bit of a video thing there where folks will know about the transition. So we will just enjoy the technology together. Let's go ahead and bring on Jeff West and Bob Burg, the co-authors of this new book. So here on the Alignment Show, we are very happy to have a special episode. Both of our guests today have been on the Alignment Show before. it's just such a great honor to have them on together to talk about their latest project together. Let's bring on Bob Burg and Jeff West. Thank you for being here, folks.
Thank you, Don. Great to be with you.
So, as we said, both of you been on before. So, here on the Alignment Show, a lot of times we go into what we call origin stories. We're looking at how people got started with what they were doing. We're going to link to those previous episodes so that people who want to know something about your individual journeys will be able to do so. But you are on here together because you've had a project just here recently. And this is a book called Saleswise to Streetwise. And I will be showing the QR code a little bit later on, but I'm going to put it up here right now so that folks can see the cover. You know, so there's the new book. And what we're going to dig into here, as far as the digging aspect, is we talk about this as being a business parable. Okay, little side trip, by the way. I've been talking about business parables, business fables. It's kind of interchangeable. Somebody told me recently that a fable involves animals.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've been saying it wrong. So
like Aesop.
Yeah. Modern ones like Who Moved My Cheese, you know, those
Right.
kind of things.
That would be a fable. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this is a business parable. But I want to ask you guys, each of your take, what is a business parable? And why are you doing that instead of just writing another sales book? Or for that matter, instead of writing a novel? Who wants to take that one first?
Okay, well, a business parable is a story, so it's a work of fiction, but it's based on universal laws and principles where there is teaching. However, it's really within the context of that story. The reason that we write parables, I guess, is for the same reason they did that in the biblical days. Stories connect. You know, stories connect on a heart-to-heart, much deeper level than how-to. But now, don't get me wrong. I've read hundreds, if not thousands, of how-to books. I love them, learned a lot from them. I've written a couple of them. I just find that parables to read, to me, I just always felt such a connection with them. And I think a lot of people feel the same way.
Okay. And for folks who may not be familiar with y'all, Bob was the co-author of a great series of, I don't know how they officially referred to it. I think I was the Go Giver series. And the first book in it was The Go Giver, a business parable. Best-selling book. It's regularly named by people like Forbes magazine as being one of the most influential books. Business parable. And Jeff, you have written a few business parables here. You've got drawing a blank here. So the latest one before this one was Said the Lady with the Blue Hair. There was the Unexpected Tour Guide. Do I have the name right? Okay. And so what are your thoughts about business parable?
Well, Don, my favorite genre to read as far as a business context is a business parable. My first experience was with it with things like Ogmandino's books and things of that nature. Go for No. I just love books that will intertwine stories that teach a lesson. And the reason it resonates so well with me, and it's why I tend to write in that genre, is because of that connection. When you can touch someone on an emotional basis, kind of like what you do in the Way of the 3-Year-Old Why, a great book.
Great book.
Thank you.
When you touch someone emotionally like that, and you combine it with teaching some really good logical principles that are going to make their life better, they'll retain it. I know I do. And it's because of the way the neurology of the brain works. But it's by far my favorite genre to read or write as far as business goes.
Okay, because I mean that really goes along with what you have taught salespeople for years with the fusion points about combining emotion and logic. Right. Bob, I know that like with the Go Giver, it was basically a parable that applied principles that you wrote about in other books, endless referrals, for example.
Yeah, and that was sort of the beginning of it. And then when co-authoring this with John David Mann, who was really the lead writer storyteller, he's just brilliant, and he's a writing mentor, I think, of all of us. Now a writing mentor of so many of us. He has a fantastic master class now in writing. And he was also he was a great entrepreneur. So, he brought a lot to the table too, as far as that goes. So when you combine that, it really, it made for an interesting story. And then we were able to continue that as a series. So the whole process was a lot of fun.
Okay. So we've got what a business parable is and why it's effective. Let me explore a little bit with you guys just in your craftsmanship. We're not going to name names for this one, but you guys probably know as well as I do, there are business parables out there that you can tell they started with their principles and they just kind of layered a story on top of it. And the story's not, the characters aren't interesting. There's nothing really at stake. You know how a good story always has a conflict or something, So what are your thoughts on, I don't know if we can say what's most important, but my thinking is you got to have a good story that would engage readers, whether you had those principles in there or not. Is that an overstatement?
It's not an overstatement, in my opinion. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends what you're trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you are, trying to accomplish a teaching, well, yeah, it's got to be in there, but you also have to have a great story. Jeff was the lead writer and storyteller on this, and just did an absolutely fantastic job. And I was telling him as he was sending, as he was sending different drafts, and we were talking out different, things, and I was saying to him, I can't wait to read the next one. In the next chapter, the next scene, and see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
So the story, I think, in a parable has to be a fantastic story. And then, and again, with Jeff, he has so much knowledge of the sales and sales leadership process that the how-to was also in there,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I think to have a successful parable, I think you have to have. I think you have to have both. It's not really an either or, it's an and. But certainly if you don't care as much about the how-to, it could just be a really fun story.
Yeah.
And people will read it.
Yeah. And definitely we need to have the principles in there. Otherwise it's not a business parable.
Really,
it's a novel.
Right. It's just a novel. Exactly.
And that's worthwhile in and of itself. But when you're wanting to get the parable out there,
Exactly.
Jeff, it may be that it varies from book to book. So just looking at this particular one,
Right.
did you start with, we know there's going to be these 5 principles or 8 principles or whatever it is. I'm in the middle of reading it right now, so I haven't gotten all the way to the end where you've got those listed. Right. Did you start with those and then you develop the story as you went along, or did you start with a story and then extract the lessons?
Oh, the lessons came first, without a doubt, in this one. Bob actually had sent me an email. It was fourth quarter last year sometime. We were discussing a couple of things, and he had replied back after I had sent him my response. He said, "By the way, save this, because when we do our parable, this could come in handy." And I read that, and I just kind of smiled a little bit because we hadn't discussed it. And I replied to his email. Then I said, "And by the way, if that's serious, that answer is, oh yeah." So I'd be honored to do that. And so in this case, we were starting with Bob's objection-proof material. He's been teaching how to become objection-proof in your sales process for a very long time. So we started with that material. We ended up putting in some principles that I do as well. But the story itself, it actually, true story here. The story is said in, I said story 5 times already, and if I were editing, I would edit that out. But my wife and I were actually sitting in New Orleans right around, it was right around the 1st of 2023. Can't remember if it was New Year's Eve, but it was close. And we were having dinner one night, and I was watching a street busker perform. And as we're sitting there, the entire storyline, or at least the basis of it, came to me. And I knew exactly what I wanted to do with the character development. I knew that. In my case, I'm like Bob about this. It's not whether the story or the principles are the most important. It is an and.
Mhm.
And as if you're going to write a great parable, the teaching has to be solid. And,
Oh,
and
yeah.
there's no way around that. My goal when I'm writing a parable is to make the story so engaging. And I try to do it from the very first page or the very first chapter at least. Make the story so engaging that even if it weren't going to teach anything, and even if someone wasn't in business or in sales of any kind, they'd say, "Oh, I got to read the rest of this book." That's kind
Yeah.
of my goal. So,
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was thinking about, with not so much which is more important, but you don't want to neglect either one. Maybe that's the way to put it.
right.
And I'll tell you what, a little bit behind what's the question there. I know with the way of the 3-year-old why, I had the principles first and developed the story around it. The one that is out to beta readers for me right now, we're about to do the cover for it. It's called Medium Well. I wrote the story, and when it went out to beta readers, the lessons aren't even there. One of the things that I asked them was, what lessons do you see in this?
Mm, mm, mm.
So either way can develop an effective business parable, but you got to have both
Oh,
in
sure.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now there's a little subtle thing in there that I want to ask about, and I'm not sure I've heard either one of you talk about this. Listeners, I have heard Jeff tell the story before about how it came about, but it just now struck me, Bob, as you were saying to him, when we do our parable, was that kind of, I don't know the technical term, would be a test close or whatever, but like if he had not picked up on that, if it, would it have been okay? I mean, what about that? So
Yeah,
does the
no,
question make sense?
we've been such great friends for years that I would have eventually. I think and if I recall this, the reason I said that we were discussing an article about objections or something. I think
We
it
were.
was, and I had my this ebook I wrote and never did anything with it. This is several years ago, and I kind of felt like it would be wasted to not actually publish it, but there was just too much to do to turn it into the how-to book that it was.
Mhm.
And that I think I probably just got the idea when we were going back and forth, because whenever Jeff and I have discussions about sales, we could talk for hours about sales.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so I think that just kind of came in my mind. It was just one of those things. Oh yeah. So when we do the parable, and then when he kind of picked up on that as well, and then I think I sent him the manuscript that I had. And so, yeah, so I don't think it was anything that clever that I was doing, is what I'm trying to say. It just kind of,
Yeah. It was kind of organic, though, coming out of your relationship. In fact, for people who aren't familiar with you, I know both of you so well, I forget this sometimes. For a lot of people, when we say sales, they think manipulation or hard sell or whatever. And you guys don't come out of that. So we want to make clear that running through all of your books is the idea of providing value. Bob, I know one of the things that I hear from you a lot, and I don't know if you phrase it this way, but you can't push a rope.
right. And I think that was actually John's saying when we were talking about influence in one of the Go Giver books. And yeah, that's, how far can you push a rope? Well, you can't you could push it far, but not very fast or not very efficiently or effectively.
Mm-hmm,
So that's why great influencers pull, right? They gentle pull. Selling really, Don, and when people say that, well, I don't like sales,
mm-hmm.
it's not that they don't like sales, it's that they don't like what they think selling is, because so many people have been brought up with and seen all the TV shows, movies, articles, or maybe even had an experience with, someone who it was trying to convince someone to buy something they don't want or need. And that's not selling. That's called being a con artist, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
not selling. Selling, by definition, is simply discovering what the other person does need, want, or desire, and helping them to get it. So
Okay.
when we approach sales from that frame, from that foundational premise, now we can feel very good about it, because we know we're helping them attain something that they want.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. And something related to it that related to the idea of becoming objection proof is the factor of rejection. I think a lot of people are afraid of sales because they think you got to be pushy, but the flip side of that is the could we say constant rejection? I know one of the phrases I love out of Streetwise to Saleswise is, and correct me on the exact wording here, that it takes a gallon of contacts to lead to a quart of results.
Yeah, gallon of no's to get a quart of yeses. Exactly.
There you go.
And certainly our colleague Andrea Waltz and her husband Richard Fenton wrote the book, on that, called Go for No, which is just a fantastic book that I wish was written when I first got into sales 40 years ago, because it would have equipped me to be able to frame no in a whole different way. And, it's interesting too, because people will say, and it's one of the big bromides in sales. Well, it's when they say no, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting the idea. Well, okay, first of all, that's true. It still stinks.
It doesn't feel that way.
No, yeah, nobody likes that. I mean, maybe somebody does. They're called masochists. But most of us, don't like to be told no. Who would? Okay. And one of the biggest challenges, I think, and the mentor in the story, Andre, shares this with Thaddeus, the protege, the new salesperson, that what drives what causes so many would-be successful sales professionals out of the business before they ever get their feet out, from beneath them, is not being told no. It's thinking they're the only one being told no. Because they go to these sales conferences and conventions and they see these people walking across stage getting these sales awards, or or even in their own office, they see the trophies or the plaques on the wall of the salesperson of the month, and they think, oh, that person never had to put up with any of that. Absolutely, they had to put up with that. And they had to put up with that a lot more than the new person has had to put up with that, but that's how they got to where they are.
Okay. Well, and dig into that just a little bit, even at that level of success that they're on stage about this, because you guys are there, you're still hearing no yourself. Now, maybe percentage wise, you're not hearing it as often, but you still got to deal with it. And so I know, Jeff, I've heard you talk about this most often. I actually was exposed to it when I was in college. I sold books door to door for a company I'm sure both of you know of, the Southwestern Company.
I knew you were going to say that.
You knew it was going to be Southwestern. And so, hearing no, they told us that it was basically a numbers game. And in your book, you talk about why maybe that's not an effective way to think about it, but you talk about something more effective. And I'm turning to Jeff on it just because I've heard it from him most recently. The idea of how much does each call, not so much how much does it earn you, but how much is each call worth? Is that a way to kind of revise that, Jeff?
I think so. And it certainly was for me in my sales career. See, what a lot of people who come into sales for the first time don't realize is they've been working jobs where they showed up and they performed a function and they got paid at the end of the day based on being there and doing the function. They didn't really have to worry about the results itself. Then they go out into sales and they start realizing, okay, I get paid when people say yes to what we're doing. And so it just flips a little switch in their brain that can be, it can be a little bit of a challenge, because every time they get a no in that scenario, the little negative emotional center of their brain throws in a somatic marker and they start getting an uneasy feeling about the whole process. But when they understand that to look at sales very similar to any other job, their job is to show up, do certain activities, almost like it's an experiment in a lab, where they're going to do certain activities, track the results, see what they're doing, adjust when needed. It starts to eliminate that pressure. And one of the principles that I learned early on, actually from the book, How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling, by a guy named Frank Bettcher. Books, I think, in the 50s or 60s, so the numbers are from back then. But what I learned in that book was, rather than think about how I got compensated in sales as being when someone bought the product, instead think of it as how many contacts did I have to make to get there. And so, like in the uniform industry that I used to be in, I knew what my calls were worth. They were worth $23 per company I contacted, based on the fact that I knew if I contacted 75 companies, I was going to close this many sales, and my average commission was enough that when I divided it out, it was worth $23 per company.
So you
And
got to tell the
that
story.
Oh, okay. This is why when you get people who've been friends for 20 years, you kind of know these things ahead of time, I guess. When I was in the Atlanta, Georgia market in the uniform industry, Don, I had already learned the lesson about how many contacts and how to calculate the average per call. And so I walked into this place it was on a Monday morning. It seemed like a lot of my more entertaining calls happened on a Monday morning. And I walked into this place, and I literally no more got the name of my name and my company name out of my mouth to the reception, to the administrative assistant working at the front desk. I saw behind her that there was a man. And in this case, that man was the owner. And as soon as I got the word uniform company out of my mouth, he went into a tirade, talking about how uniform companies were all owned by the mafia and none of us were any good. We were all scoundrels, and he didn't like any of us. And I started smiling. And when he finished up, I said, well, look, thank you for the $23. And I turned around to walk out. And he said, wait, what do you mean, thank you for the $23? And I did with those little military about faces. I used to be in a marching band. I know how to do those things. I did a little military about face, and I explained the concept to him. And the man said, I need to have you come in and talk to my salespeople, which I said, for a fee? I didn't know I was predicting my own future.
Oh, my goodness. And for both of you, I know enough about you to be able to see within Streetwise to Saleswise to where you are drawing on your actual experience. Because there's something similar, I think, that happens with Thaddeus in there. You're drawing on the New Orleans trip.
Right.
Bob is drawing on his experience with the becoming objection proof. How much of the book, where am I going with this? There's the music thing. Jeff, a lot of people don't know about Jeff, that Jeff's major in college was music.
Right.
And so to me, what this says, especially for anybody who's listening, who's thinking about maybe writing their own book or something, well, it's all been said before or whatever. It hasn't been taken through your unique point of view, your unique experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So how important was it for you guys to bring your experiences together? There's kind of a related question here. I'll go ahead and throw it out here. You've mentioned a couple times you guys have known each other for years. Why did it take this long for you to write a book together?
I'm slow. I actually retired from the insurance industry about 10 years ago. And that's when I wrote the first book, The Unexpected Tour Guide. And Bob was the first person I sent it to and just gave me such encouragement. And then I did a lot of speaking that first year. And then I started doing more online things and not so much worrying about the books. And I guess it was 3 years ago. It was probably I had written a how-to book, but when Lisa Wilbur and I met in Bob's Go Giver Success Alliance that he hosts every week with he and Kathy Tajanel, met Lisa Wilbur. That book came out of that group, and I realized that I had been jilting myself from my favorite happy place, which is writing. I love to write.
Yeah, absolutely.
Same with Don and his character in The 3-Year-Old Why.
Right. Yeah, something very similar there about respecting what's most important to you. So that was one of my questions was, how you went from a successful sales career into writing now. And so that gets at that. And I'll, I threw that question at you about what took you so long. The tongue-in-cheek aspect of that was you guys could not have written this book 20 years ago. I mean, the experiences that you had kind of brought you together to this place to where this is the perfect time and place for this book. Would you agree with that?
Oh, sure. But I've got to tell you something that I think it's remarkable what Jeff has done. And that, remember, so he was a sales professional who really started to make it big with the insurance company he was working with. And really did well. And then he became their state sales coordinator, which is the leader of the team leader, and built up one of the biggest in that company. Okay. So he had a wonderful career, both in sales and then sales leadership. And then he retired, and then he went into writing, and he has become an absolutely fantastic writer. I mean, this is not something he dabbles in now. And I mean, he did just what he did when he was in sales. He learned how to sell, he applied it, he sold. So he gets into writing. He writes, first of all, that book a few years ago, the unintended sales guide. Unintended or unintentional, I can't remember.
Unintended tour guide.
Tour guide.
Unintended tour guide, excuse me. I've got it right in back of me too. But which was a great book. And then his one with Lisa was great, but he also started really studying the art and the craft. And of course, then he took John David Mann's mastery class. And I mean, this guy, he's become, within a few years, I mean, he's become a master writer and storyteller. That just does not happen. So, 20 years ago, that wasn't the case. He was still in sales, and, we were friends, and, and could talk about sales, but that wasn't what we were both doing. So yeah, it's been great timing, and I happened to get him just in his stride as he was, really.
Excellent. So let's draw it down here as in terms of this book, Streetwise to Saleswise. Could you put into 3 sentences, 4 sentences, why somebody should read this book? Now that could go any number of places. They don't even have to necessarily be in sales, So why should somebody read this book?
If they're in sales, there's going to be so much gold as far as how to take someone who knows absolutely nothing about sales and take them through a process where they come out on the other end a very successful sales professional. But even if someone's not in sales, there are so many leadership lessons that we've built into the storyline. And that's one of my favorite versions of the book is on Audible. But the interaction with Bob narrating, he's voicing all the narration from the perspective of the mentor, and I'm focusing on the character of the protege. That interaction is some of the best leadership skills, best leadership training I think people can get in that arena, whether they're in sales or not. And it teaches where the focus should be. And it really, in my opinion, so mirrors my friendship with Bob anyway, because when I became successful in sales and my career really began to take off with the insurance company I was with, it was because I had read this book from somebody I didn't know called Endless Referrals by some guy named Bob Burg. And when I applied that, my career took off. So.
That's very kind. Thank you.
Indeed. Well, I know it's just the truth. I've had the same experience, although I'm not in direct sales. It's such a great relationship book, as all of these are. That's one reason that I kind of emphasize for our listeners, you don't have to be in commissioned sales to really benefit from these. And we're going a little bit over time, but I just want to dig a little bit into this one. There's another major character in there who's not in sales, not in business. And remember, I haven't finished the book here, so I'm not looking for spoilers. But what would you say is the lesson that comes out of, am I saying it right, Livia? Yeah, she is the musician. She's the street busker.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I'm going to see how it turns out here. But what's the lesson that comes out of what's going on with her? Can we say that without giving spoilers away?
I think so. Bob, you want to take it?
Well, I think what we could safely say is she is someone with a lot of potential, who's a wonderful human being from loving parents, and she has great ability, tons of talent, a joy for life, a sweet personality, and maybe a little lack of self-confidence.
I'm picking up on that. Yeah.
And part of the story has to do with her really maybe or maybe not coming into her own and discovering what she really has. So that's
the dramatic tension there. So Yeah.
She was a wonderful character that Jeff wrote based on someone that, in fact, he sent me a picture of the inspiration for Livia.
Okay.
And she was really a magnificent, beautiful character.
Wonderful.
I
Wonderful.
never really got to know her, so everything about her is made up.
Made up, yeah.
But I think my favorite thing, Don, that I did in the storyline with Livia is she helps Thaddeus grow up in a
Oh.
really strong way.
Oh yeah, very, yes.
Okay, so there's a lesson there about collaboration in a sense. You know, maybe not the way we think of collaboration in the everyday sense, but the way we influence each other. Because I know the Go Giver Success Alliance has been such a huge influence on me, on all of us, in ways that we couldn't have planned ahead of time. So, what's next? This may be putting you on the spot. You may have not talked about this. You may have talked about it, and you say,
next one is Streetwise to Saleswise. This time, it's personal.
Oh,
I love it. Arnold Schwarzenegger will be a part of the character. He's coming to New Orleans to get the people to stand up. Stand up.
Oh, yes. And so, speaking of imitations, you are going to want to listen to the audio probably so that you can hear Satchmo himself, Mr. Louis Armstrong, sing one of his most famous songs.
That'll be a real treat there. So thank you. Thank you. All right. You both know
about some things. You were asking what's going to, Bob and I are talking about some things that we may be doing, and we'll make announcements about that in the future, but I'm kind of excited about that.
Me too.
I'm also working on a book right now with another co-author who his market is servicing the financial services industry, and I've already got the parable going on that already. I've kind of finished the first draft of.
I got to read the first scene. It's awesome.
Excellent.
He started to tell me what was going on, like where he was going with some of the character. I started to go, nah, I want to read it as I'm,
Don't want the spoilers, but yeah, it's when you've written a book that people are really invested in the characters, they want to know what comes next. Way the 3-Year-Old Why. There's some continuation from characters in that book into Medium Well, and a lot of it is because people wanted to know, what comes next. So I'm not putting you on the spot. I'm just hoping, for selfish reasons, that I'm going to learn a little bit more about these folks. Great. So you both know me well enough to know that a favorite closing question of mine is there's probably something that you wish that I had asked that I didn't. What would that be, and what would your answer be?
Well, I'm kind of thinking, is it true what they say that a dog's tongue is actually cleaner than a human's? I say no. Cats, I'm not sure about.
And we've got to tell, before we started recording, we were admiring Bob's cat, and the cat took a chunk out of his arm. So
yeah, he did. Buddy has a biting issue, which we're working on. I'm trying to let him know this is a non-biting establishment. Doesn't seem to get it.
Oh my goodness.
Oh wow. Yeah. And all the one-liners that just went through my head, I cannot say on the show.
We are a family-friendly show. Yes,
we are a family-friendly show.
Oh man, is there a question that has come to mind though, Jeff, that you can talk about?
Probably for me, it would be something along the lines of. Well, I'm drawing a blank on the question, Don. This is an authentic show here. I'm drawing a blank, but I will tell you, it could be, the question is why I started really pushing the storyline and parables to do that. And I read a blog post from a guy. This was right after I wrote the Unexpected Tour Guide. And in his blog post, if I remember correctly, he's a Harvard professor. And he was saying the business parable is dead. And I set my goal to prove him wrong.
Wonderful. Yeah. I was having a conversation with a well-known writer in the publishing sphere. His name is Mark Leslie Lefebvre. And he was observing that there ought to be a BISAC, a technical term, the categories of booksellers.
No.
there is not a BISAC category for business parable. And so they can get shelved all over the place. In his view, they're still very much alive. So thank you both for continuing to provide quality writing and lessons and learning and good stories. It makes the world a better place, and it makes the world better for salespeople and the people that they serve. So thank you very much. Now, one of the things I'm still trying to learn is how to smoothly transition over to my live self from a recording. So I'm going to just turn it over to my alter ego over here. Don, take it away. Got to get better at that. Yeah, what a conversation. That was so much fun. You could tell that they have fun with each other. It's one of the reasons I like doing this podcast. We get to have conversations with people that otherwise wouldn't get to have. Now, we've mentioned a lot of resources in that conversation. So, folks, we're going to have the show notes. We'll have all of those links for people who are on audio only. Remember that you can go to confidencecultivators.com and be able to find show notes. And I've got a crawl going down there at the bottom also. I put the show notes up in a QR code a little earlier. So want to be sure you can get access to all of those resources. I will also comment that one of the things involved in a recording like this, we actually recorded this pretty soon after the book was published. In fact, it may have been just before it was published. I'm not 100% sure, but it was one of the first ones that they did. Now, they've been on dozens of podcasts since. And so I'm just very happy to have been able to have this conversation. I recommend the book to you. We will have a link to the book in our show notes if you don't already have it. But for folks who are just coming across this, as we said in the interview, it is very important to people who are in direct sales, but whether or not you sell for a living, in the first place, you probably really do. We all need to influence people in our jobs, in our careers. But even aside from that, just in terms of personal relationships, these principles will apply even in your family. So I want to encourage you to check it out. In any case, we are a little bit over time, our usual time, but I think it was worthwhile spending this time with them. I hope it has been time well spent for you. We will be next week with somebody I actually mentioned in that interview, and I didn't realize it was going to be lining up like this. But next Friday, we have Mark Leslie Lefebvre. Mark has been involved as a bookseller, a book publisher, a writer, for over 30 years. He's one of the people that I really look up to as a mentor at a distance. And so I'm very pleased to be able to have him on. We will talk about his journey, how he got where he is and where he's going. And that's going to be coming up next week on The Alignment Show. Hope that you will come back and be with us 10 a.m. on Fridays as we work to help you to live your values so that you can value your life. That's it for this week's episode of The Alignment Show. What has it inspired you to do in your own life? Whatever it is, take action now and take the first step. It will help you to talk with a friend about what you're thinking. Share confidencecultivators.com to spread the goodness. And remember to live your values and value your life. We will see you next week on The Alignment Show.